Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Here is your harbor of the soul. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, Major Ray's Mask. Major Ray's Mask is a Legend of Zelda creepypasta about hacking a used copy of Major Ray's Mask with a game shark. It is not to be confused with BN, another popular Major Ray's Mask pasta. So, I don't know if you guys are too young to remember Game Sharks. I'm not even sure if they make them anymore. They were this cool little thing that you could plug into a game console and used to hack the game and discover cheat. My buddy still has one for his old Nintendo 64, and we still like to mess around with it sometimes. I found a used copy of Major Ray's Mask the other day, and I realized we'd never tried to hack it. So I dropped $5 on the cartridge last night. I called up my friend, grabbed a case of beer, and went over to his house for some sweet drunken retro gaming. We were having a great time, making Link fall through floors and walk through walls and all that good stuff. We even found a code that caused a huge number of those annoying little dogs to spawn, swamping the map and generally causing chaos after the standard cheats got boring. We decided to run the code search on the Game Shark again. Oddly enough, the Game Shark came up with a brand new code sequence, one we'd never seen before. Being slightly buzzed from the beer and bored with throwing infinite bombs at unsuspecting enemies, we punched the code in and fired up the game. Game Sharks have a tendency to cause minor glitches, so neither of us was very surprised when the game completely skipped over the menu screens and jumped directly into the action. We were outside of the Snow Temple, and the clock was stuck at a couple minutes to midnight on the third day. The moon was leering at us from the sky, nearly ready to crash into the ground. Other than the frozen time, the game seemed to be functional, so I pushed forward on the control stick and sent Link off in exploration of the world as it teetered directly on the brink of the apocalypse. There was a distinct lack of enemies, and strange patterns of pixels would randomly appear and disappear. Naturally, we were starting to get pretty bored since we had nothing to kill. I decided to shut the console down and try another code. But I figured I'd look up at the moon one more time. To my surprise, it was much larger than it had been before, and we realized that it was still approaching the Earth despite the fact that time was stopped. It was nearly ready to crash down, so we decided to see if anything cool would happen in the endgame cutscene. Oddly enough, the cutscene never triggered. Instead, the moon just kept getting closer and closer. I could barely make out movement on it, and I realized that the spinning Major Ray's Mask from the menu screen was appearing on the surface in a flurry of oddly shaped pixels. The spinning mask continued to get clearer and clearer until it completely hid the moon's evil grin. Something seemed very wrong with the mask, though. It seemed too well animated for an image on an Nintendo 64. The lines and details were very clear, and the colors were far too vivid as the mask spun around. The eyes seemed to follow me, staring directly at me. I was hypnotized by it, and I sat there, beer in one hand, controller in the other, unable to look away from the screen. Extremely disturbing images began to flash across the TV screen as the moon continued to approach. Everything appeared to be on fire, and quick glimpses of the poor, innocent animated characters of the town showed them dying extremely gruesome deaths. Major Ray's Mask completed one final rotation and stopped, staring directly at us. A gnarled hand came up, slowly pulling the mask away, and underneath was the Skull Kid. A horrible expression of agony and pain burned on his face. He opened his mouth and with a sickening groan of cartridge era video game sounds, uttered the words that have been haunting me at night. "You lost the game." The screen went pitch black, and the Nintendo 64 shut off. Me and my friend looked at each other. Unsure of what we'd just seen, he claims it was just an alternate ending the producers didn't use in the actual game, but the whole thing seemed way too paranormal to be that easily explained. The second story, knocks on the window. The digital clock humming quietly on my nightstand was the only sound my ears could detect. The night was dead quiet, yet I knew he was there right on schedule. He would be lurking there. Outside my window he would knock. I, for reasons I wish I could explain, would open the blinds. A sense of dread flooding my body. He would stare at me, and I would stare at him. He would leave soon after, and I would stay awake until the sun began to rise. This was our routine. My mind was wandering 1,000 miles away when he knocked that night, though my eyes lingered on the window. I told myself I wouldn't open the blinds. I told myself that tonight he wouldn't scare me, and that I would get the rest I so desperately needed. He knocked twice more. I grabbed a pillow, squeezing it tight over my head, and began humming some old nursery rhyme from a childhood which, at that moment, seemed so long ago. He knocked once again, and this time, it was a hell of a lot less courteous of a knock than usual. It morphed into a loud thumping noise. I finally threw the pillow off my head and opened the blinds. His pale, wrinkly face leered in at me, his lifeless, black eyes that shone despite their darkness peered into my own. His stringy hair fluttered a little in the wind. He seemed to be breathing somewhat harshly, and though it was hard to determine his mood as anything other than emotional, I could sense an amount of animosity I had never felt before. After what seemed like hours, he turned around and was on his way. I faced the ceiling and wept. This had been going on for more than a month. I had tried to talk to others about it, but I could never finish my sentences. They degrade into quiet mumblings and whispers. I was so tired, and I had even begun to wonder if I was losing my mind. I had tried sleeping pills, but even they couldn't help me to sleep through the night. The weirdest part is that I always woke up about 5 minutes before he knocked. I knew, instinctively, that he would be there. I was so tired the next night. I told myself that under no circumstances would I look out that window. I didn't care if he was on the verge of breaking the glass. I would not give him what he wanted. I would not feed him. He'd have to find someone else to haunt, someone else to steal sleep from. He'd have to leave me alone. I woke up, and I instantly knew what was going to happen. It's funny, I always anticipated his knocks, and yet I still jumped a little when I finally heard him. I lay in my bed quietly, as if I hadn't heard anything. He knocked again, and I hid under the pillow once more. He knocked again, even louder than he had the night before. I whimpered, but remained under the pillow. He knocked twice more after that. Things got quiet. I no longer had the feeling I was being watched. I pulled my head out from under my pillow and slowly looked out the window. Nothing, just my backyard. I laughed. I laughed so hard that little tears began to slip out of my eyes. He was somebody else's problem now. I looked at the clock, noticed that I had only been awake for about 15 minutes, and turned over to go back to sleep. I had just fallen into that uncertain stage where dreams mingle with reality when I heard the distant click of a door on my back. Something had just entered into my house from the outside, something from my backyard. I knew it was him. I listened quietly as his footsteps made their way from my kitchen to my dining room. to the short hallway outside of my bedroom. He was walking slowly, patiently, making no attempts to hide his presence. When he knocked on my door, I almost vomited. I had to do something, anything. I was paralyzed with fear. He knocked again, trembling. I pulled the pillow back over my head. All that could be heard was the sound of weeping, knocking, and a digital clock humming quietly to itself. I was so tired. The third story. Notes. All this shit started when I found that little note. On a square piece of paper, I found at the bottom of a box I was moving out of my basement. It read HELLO. PLESCRESPOND. I had no idea how long the paper had been there. Those boxes had sat in my basement since I moved in. I ignored it until the next morning, when I opened my coffee maker to throw out the grounds, and inside was a sopping wet piece of paper that read PLESCRESPO and EPLESCESELP. I figured it must have been put inside my coffee maker by whoever was pulling this pointless prank, because it wasn't there when I put my coffee grounds in. I found more notes under my mousepad, inside my computer tower, while I was putting in some new RAM, between the layers of tissue of my toilet paper roll, and under my DVD player's disc tray, places that no one would ever look. Places you'd never think of putting a note. Places no one would ever look, and it would be foolish to put note, because who knew when they would see it? But it kept happening, and they all said the same thing every time, begging me to respond and help them, being the retard I am. One day, I just got fed up when I found one inside a cup in my dishwasher right after I had won it. The paper was dry. I wrote on the back of it, HELLO. I'm married SPONDING. PLEA SCXPA INYOURSITUACION, and slid it under a crack in my bath-fitted tub. No sooner had I left my bathroom did I find another piece of paper floating on the surface tension of my glass of Sprite I had in the living room. I carefully picked it out of my drink. It read THA and KYOU, and in larger letters, I'm TR APD. I waved it around to dry it off a bit, and wrote on the back of it again, why are you trapped? How are you sending me notes? And not creative enough to think of where to put it, I just threw it behind my couch. I waited and looked, but I didn't see any other notes for the rest of the day. The next day, I checked my mail. Inside of some spam letter was the next note. INTACSCCUNDDIMENSION BELOWYOU. I wasted no time in responding with, whoever you are, this prank is retarded, give it a rest, and threw it outside. The wind blew it away. The next note I got was still in obnoxious capital letters, though it was much longer than before, and the last sentence seemed to have been squeezed into the remaining space. I think it was a passage from some encyclopedia or textbook. The first dimension is a defined point in space. The second dimension, this was underlined as anything that exists with height and width, while the third adds length, the fourth includes time, and the fifth is the past, time that has already occurred and is solidified in time-space. Everything beyond that was squished into read. I rolled my eyes and responded again. How can you read this if you're in the second dimension? How can you even exist? I slipped this note into the space in my toaster between the element and the metal casing. My reply came when I brushed it out of my hair the next morning, before I took a shower. WRITIS to D. VIS. IONIS to D. WO to DIMAG. IMAG. the SSUP, that didn't really get to the point of how I was supposed to rescue this person, which I defined in my next note, that I flushed down the toilet. MAD 3D was all that was on the new slip of paper I found inside a chocolate bar I unwrapped. Later on, how the idiot was putting these inside sealed products was beyond me. But at this point I decided to play along. Maybe it was some kind of TV show thing. How? Was all I wrote for my reply. I remember exactly where I put it, because it was the last thing I wrote for a long time. I put it in a crack between my length mirror, and it wouldn't back in as soon as I let go. It slid out of sight, and I didn't see any papers again for 1.5 years. Getting dressed one morning for work, I went into my room and adjusted my tie and shirt in my mirror, the same one, only it was now on the opposite side of my room. Looking into it, I noticed a square behind me on the wall. Turning around, there was none. In the instant before I turned around again, must have fallen off. But in the mirror it was still there, still stuck to the wall. I touched my mirror, thinking maybe it was some sort of warping or optical illusion, but it wasn't. I lifted my heavy mirror up from the ground and slowly walked backwards with it, nearing myself to the opposite wall on which the paper was stuck. The closer I got, the clearer the message on it became, until I stopped, sandwiched between the heavy mirror and the wall, looking at the paper immediately over my shoulder. MAKEYOUTD, it said. I moved the fuck out of that house as soon as I could, after bunking at my girlfriend's for a while. I got the fuck rid of that mirror, the toaster, everything. My heart still skips a beat when I see any perfectly square piece of paper sitting on the floor, all alone. I still live in fear of someday I'll open up a book or look in the inner lining of a jacket, and a piece of paper will flop out. I check all my things now constantly. I also don't drink coffee anymore.